Looks like your little snacky got ruined. Why don't you go cry to your mommy?
Hey paisanos, last time on the Pokemon Nuzlocke series we made it all the way to the Kanto champion, but we just couldn't cut it. So now we gotta start all over again, from scratch, in a new region with a new name. Now our heroine, Wada, is on a new journey to become the very best in Johto. Can she do it, or will she fall all over again? It's time for the Pokemon Crystal Nuzlocke. Almost immediately after the smashing success of Pokemon Red and Blue did the second generation of Pokemon begin development. The game was initially meant for a 1998 release date to coincide with the end of the anime's first series, but due to Game Freak getting sidetracked by the spin-off game, Pokemon Stadium, the game had to be delayed, with Pokemon Yellow taking its release slot. The original team for Gen 1 was basically just 4 guys, so when the sequel project looked like it wasn't going anywhere, Satoru Iwata, then the president of HAL Laboratory, would help the team by developing new tools for compressing the Pokemon graphic code. Eventually the team would get their act together and Pokemon Gold and Silver would release in 1999 with the upgraded third version Pokemon Crystal following in 2000. Something I didn't mention in my Red Nuzlocke video were the third versions that Pokemon do for their games. The Kanto games received Pokemon Yellow, a version that gave a bunch of technical and graphical upgrades and implemented ideas from the Pokemon anime. I didn't use it for my first Nuzlocke because it gives you all 3 starters plus an above average Pikachu, and it felt a tad unfair to the idea of the run. So I decided to go with the base game despite the fact it's still a general upgrade over Red and Blue. However, for this I'll be playing the third version because from Crystal to Platinum, the third version is just the superior version of the game. In Pokemon Crystal, our journey takes place in Johto, the neighbor of the Kanto region. Taking place 3 years after the end of the first game, the game opens with the player living in the small town of Newbark. The local researcher, Professor Elm, requests you take a special egg to a colleague of his and give you a Pokemon to help defend yourself. Our heroine ends up picking the fire starter Cyndaquil and naming it Tabasco. What kind of fuck up misspells Tabasco? After trudging through the first few routes, you deliver the egg to Elm's colleague and also link up with an old friend, Professor Oak. I'm gonna use that as a tangent to talk about how much I like how this game uses past characters. While they don't show up very often in the first half of the game, seeing older characters help make the world feel alive and connected. It really does feel like you just went to a different city and not an entirely new world. After delivering the egg, our heroine runs into a trainer with a bit of a tood. The jerk proclaims she's weak and he'll be the strongest Pokemon trainer ever. What a dick! The kid brings out his Totodile, but Wada is able to send him packing. But the moron drops his ID on the way out. Soon after the battle, Wada returns home and finds that Professor Elm has been robbed. Turns out the culprit is that kid Wada battled earlier and his name is Lee. What a dick! Now with a new rival, Wada is gifted 5 Pokeballs and the resolve to become the best that no one ever was. With the goal set, the first challenge on the list is to hit up Violet City and get the first gym badge. Along the way we pick up a couple of Pokemon and not much happens honestly. Although it is immediately obvious how much better this game feels over Gen 1. All of the new sprites are very detailed for the Game Boy and everything just feels faster. Not to mention the new additions to the battle list system, including 2 new types, held items, and the special stat split. Because it's the most relevant right now, let's start with held items. Held items are pretty basic. They're items that your Pokemon handle in battle and will activate under different conditions or provide a passive benefit. The main form of held items are berries, which are plentiful and it's always nice to find some in the overworld. They even get some use in Azalea Town where you can use them to make new special Pokeballs. They aren't much, but they help let the player strategize a little bit more, so I like them. Speaking of Azalea Town, Wada makes her way over there and loses a Pokemon on the way, Sentinel the Sentret. Killed itself trying to fight a Goldeen. A tragic but pathetic and very annoying end, which sets the tone for the entire playthrough. After that, we take down the second gym, run into Lee and kick the shit out of him. We also get a lot of eggs. For eggs, I consider the ones the game give you as freebies. Most because the game just giving you a free egg is pretty rare, so it'll never happen enough where I can just use that to fill out my ranks. I should mention that eggs are tied to the daycare system. Daycares are buildings where you can drop 2 Pokemon off and they gain EXP for every step you take. And if you leave the right pair of Pokemon, you get an egg. I banned using the daycare to get eggs in general, but the daycare itself is a pretty good resource for getting some weak Pokemon strong without having to do nothing but grind for an hour. But the first egg we got ended up hatching into Riot the Tygrogue, which turned out to be a fucking shiny baby, woo! Moving out of Azalea City, we make our way to Goldenrod City, which is a shining beacon of how much better looking this game is over Gen 1. But this is also the point where the first major flaws of the Johto region shine. And it's that there are no Johto Pokemon. That's the flaw. Up to this point, almost all of my team members are Kanto Pokemon with the exceptions of Tabasco and Sentinel, who's already dead. And so many of them are repeats of Pokemon I used last time. Jerkin Jr. and Foxtrot are nearly identical to their counterparts found in Kanto. And I've checked the stats, most of the Pokemon found for half this game are just Kanto Pokemon. This is just unfortunate because I started a new adventure wanting to see all of the Pokemon this region has to offer, but most of the ones here are just common mons for the first game with no real changes. But I'll stop my complaining for the time being and get back to the adventure. For our next gym leader, we have the dreaded normal type expert Whitney, a gym leader so strong and basically the only one brought up whenever Johto is relevant, and in all honesty, she lives up to the hype. I was playing this game with future information and even did a session of grinding with full knowledge that Whitney was dangerous. Even with that knowledge, she still managed to take out 2 of my Pokemon. While the first loss was Junior the Rattata, who was a sacrificial lamb, the second loss, however, was much more tragic. It was Tabasco, our starter, the MVP of the run so far. We managed to get the bash, but at what cost? Soon after the battle, Wada would catch Sriracha the Growlithe, who would be the go-to fire type, while Jerkin the Pidgeot would be promoted to the team's MVP after this point. But things would never really be the same. After that, death became the norm. For every one member we got, another would fall. Although the main 4 of the team from this point onward are Sriracha, Jerkin, Ultron the Magneton, and 4th the Nidorino. Despite the obnoxious amount of death, the gym leaders almost all go down like tissue paper. After Marty, the 4th gym leader, the game kinda starts to fall apart. After the 4th gym, you can do the next 3 in any order you want, in addition to the Team Rocket plotline that's also been happening. The idea of having an open progression system like this sounds neat, but it comes with several problems. To account for the player's freedom, the levels of most trainers plateau around level 20, so any non-major fight just becomes really boring because you'll constantly be about 7 levels over the enemy. It doesn't help that the major fights do rise in levels pretty consistently, so it's very likely you'll wipe like 8 guys who range from level 15 to 22, then fight a gym leader who's at level 30. There's no real reason to do any of these sections out of order, making all of this feel really pointless. In addition to this, Team Rocket is fucking everywhere this time around, and the average Rocket Goon is even more annoying to deal with. These assholes constantly use Pokemon that are fast, can confuse you, poison you, or do all of the above. The only exception to this are all of the coughings they use, which are there for the sole purpose of self-destructing, which is just outright bad design. While it isn't impossible to predict when it's gonna happen, it really doesn't do anything but inconvenience the player. There's no challenge to it happening. At best, you either send out a ghost type, or at worst, you pray that your mon can take the blast. Although I might be a little bitter considering it took out 3 members of the team. None of this is too bad in a vacuum, but becomes incredibly annoying when you have to spend like 15 minutes clearing these assholes out of an area or dungeon. It's also really disappointing because it shows how poorly Game Freak handled balancing Pokemon between games. Poison and bug types were by far the worst types to use in the first game, and were a nuisance to encounter. And it's a shame to see that instead of making them more viable in this game and turning them into an actual threat, Game Freak just decided to give them all to Team Rocket and make dealing with them a headache. But, despite all of my whining, I think Team Rocket got an overall improvement. While I did praise Giovanni's part of Gen 1's story, the rest of Team Rocket were mostly just faceless mooks with no real plans or personality. Here, several members of Team Rocket are named and are given actual character. Along with this, they also have a real plan. A pathetic one, but it's still a plan all the same. There's also some stuff that connects our rival, Lee, remember him, to Team Rocket, but none of that is really acted upon until the Generation 2 remakes that are way down the line. Overall, Team Rocket is still doing what they were doing the first time around, now they're just doing it better, which is a pretty apt way of describing this game as a whole. But after this point, I was pretty zoned out of the game. Everything was in a constant state of bullshit. Between Pokemon running away from like half of my encounters to self-destructions, and the insane level jump from Gym 7 to Gym 8 just made me super unimmersed. It doesn't help that I reached a point where a team member would die, but I wouldn't feel anything because I knew it was going to take forever to get strong, or I knew it was kinda ass in the first place, which is honestly Johto's biggest problem. The new Pokemon are way too rare to the point where you only start to encounter them regularly in the late game. Even then, they're all much weaker than the Kanto Pokemon. And I'm usually of the mind you should use the Pokemon you like when it comes to casual playthroughs, but doing a challenge run like this just made it obvious how bad most of the Johto Pokemon are in terms of stats. And I don't think I'm being a tryhard when I say it's bad game design to not have a good incentive to catch and use the new Pokemon given to you, especially when the average Kanto Pokemon outscales them. It's unfortunate because I like most of the designs, but some of them are just too weak and require way too much grinding to be useful. Even normal fights with these mons can become an ordeal just from the fact they have weak stats, garbage move pools, or both. And that's not including all the Pokemon that desperately needed evolutions. And Gen 4 kinda helped with this, but you can't see that here. But let's get back to the game before I pop a blood vessel. During the training session for Gym 8, Ford died to a Graveler, but I wasn't recording, so I had to rewind the game to see it again, but it didn't happen the same way. So to even things out, I banished Ford to Box 13. I also lost Ultron at the very end of Victory Road. Man, I wonder why I've heard that before. Why does this keep happening to me? Not too long after that travesty, we managed to get through Victory Road, take down Lee one final time, and do a grinding session before our way into the Elite Four. And it went as expected. We made it all the way to Lance, but we suffered too many casualties to clutch the win, and that's where I called it. Despite the fact I did have other Pokemon in the box, I didn't feel like grinding them to the proper levels, and cheating through the rest of it felt disingenuous. I was also just generally sick of Gen 2 and its shit anyways. Something I should at least mention is that once you beat Lance, you get access to Kanto and all of its gym leaders. I think this is a really cool, if a bit overrated addition, but I'll deal with that once I get to the Generation 2 remakes or Liquid Crystal, whichever comes first. Even with all of my complaining, I still really like Crystal, and I still consider it a major upgrade from Gen 1 in every regard. The game looks better, sounds better, and is written better. Johto is a region filled with life and lore in every corner, and the game is a bit more balanced and the teams of trainers are much more interesting, but that newfound balance is held back by the fact that the Kanto Pokemon are way more common than Johto Pokemon, which are on average just the worst option. There's also the fact that some balancing choices just don't mean squat. Earlier on I mentioned the 2 new types in the special stat. The special stat split didn't get mentioned because while it was a necessary change as it made Pokemon with high special stats less dominant, it's one of those type of things where it's only really considered in a competitive scene or in prepping for endgame fights. On the other hand, there are 2 new types this game has, which are the Dark and Steel types. The reason I never mention these is because they aren't relevant at all. There are only 6 fully evolved Dark types and only 5 fully evolved Steel types, 2 of which you can only get through trading. And while I do think both types have insanely cool designs, they're so rare and sometimes just outright garbage that they feel utterly irrelevant. Which is sad because that means the major problem with Gen 1's balancing, the fact that psychic types were way too good, continues to go unsolved. Don't get it twisted though, the game does have other problems, like how the level gap on bosses feel way worse because almost every trainer in wild Pokemon ranges from 20 to around 30, even in the late game, but the late gym leaders in the Elite Four are around 40 pushing into the 50s, meaning that the player is getting minimal EXP to prep for fights that are definitely going to be way out of their range, which annoys the fuck out of me because everybody's always like, oh man, use your Pokemon that's your favorite, not the ones that are good, but the game isn't built for that. If you want to use your favorites, you're going to have a much worse time, which is just unfortunate, because I like these guys. I like using the shitty ones. But damn, in a Nuzlocke, that shit is fucking horrible. And then there's the fact that the AI went from dumb to mean. Pokemon will run away or explode the second you encounter them, but I will admit, that's only really a problem if you're doing a Nuzlocke run. And even outside the Dark and Steel types, the Johto Pokedex feels very half-baked. Johto introduces 100 new Pokemon, so for every really cool Pokemon with no caveats, there's one that really could have used another evolution, like Noctowl or Ladybug, or just a baby version of a Kanto Pokemon. Although I do stand by what I said last time, this is probably like a top 5 Game Boy game. There's not really much competition if I'm being honest. I think the next one after this is probably superior though. Not Gen 4 though, fuck that game.